Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Redwood Caregiver Resource Center is one of 11 caregiver resource centers in the state of California. We've been around since the mid-'80s, and we cover 7 counties. So my main office is in Santa Rosa. We're a program of North Coast Opportunities in Ukiah. We cover Sonoma, Napa, Solano, Mendocino, Lake, Humboldt, and Del Norte counties. After 14 years, I still have to do it on my fingers, but covered those. So I'm really glad to be back up here at the Willits Senior Center. I've taught classes here before, but it's been a few years since we've actually done a class at this senior center. So thanks for having me. I've been asked to come and talk about communicating with folks with various neurocognitive impairments, and it's one of my favorite topics to present on. I started working with people with dementia in the late 80s myself, volunteering at the Sonoma County Alzheimer's Respite Center, which was one of the pioneering day programs at the time with the purpose of providing respite to fatigued family caregivers. Worked there for over 15 years, all through high school, college, graduate school, and I've been at Redwood for the past 14 years. So happy to be here. My main role is to help with education and some of our clinical consultations. So we do support groups, we do classes, we do individual counseling, we have grants to help pay for respite care, we have grants to help pay for legal consultations, and we have individualized action plans for family caregivers who come to us fatigued and exhausted and confused, or whatever shape they're in. What we're going to be covering today actually is pulled from one of our 4-week classes called It Takes Two: Understanding Dementia Behavior. And there's a lot of information. We're just going to kind of hit the tip of the iceberg today. But what I'd love to have you walk away with today is an understanding that, yes, we can still connect with people who have neurocognitive impairments. Yes, we do have a foot in the door, even if the disease process is fairly advanced. And I'd like for you to have an understanding about where that connection is more likely and where that connection really is not going to be likely. So a better understanding of setting up some realistic expectations. And I think doing that can help us feel more empowered if we're caring for a loved one with a dementia and just feeling at a loss. It can also help reduce some of the stress for our loved one when we can kind of meet them where they are. So just by show of hands, so I have an idea of who's in the room, who is here because they are caring for a loved one with a neurocognitive impairment, dementia, or some form of memory loss? Yes, so you're caring for or about someone, a family member, okay? And who's here in a professional capacity? Okay. And who's here just to get more information? Okay, okay. Anyone else here for a purpose I didn't mention? Yeah? Support. I love that. So before we get started and jump into specific principles and techniques for communicating with people with dementia, I would like to first kind of get a foundation understanding of what dementia is and what it's not. So when you hear the word dementia, what comes to mind? What do you think of? How do you define dementia? So forgetfulness, I don't remember, yeah? Confusion, disorientation, repetitive questioning, frustration. So communication challenges and anger, maybe some paranoia. These are all sometimes obsessive. So these are all symptoms that we see crop up under the umbrella of dementia. Dementia itself is not a diagnosis. It is not a diagnosis. So when people call into my office and I say, so what's going on with your dad, or what's going on with your wife? And they say, oh, she was diagnosed with dementia. My first question to them is, oh, what kind? And so this is kind of getting to your question, ferreting out, I always get that question, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Dementia is a cluster of symptoms, including everything we just mentioned. I define dementia as impaired intellectual capacity, lack of ability to use logic and reasoning, and memory loss. So it's that cluster of symptoms, and we can arrive at that group of symptoms from multiple causes. In the same way that I can have a fever caused by an abscessed tooth, or an ear infection, or the flu, or leukemia. All are elevated temperatures, right? A fever's a fever. Same kind of concept with dementia. All include that overarching umbrella of impaired intellectual capacity, lack of ability to use good logic and reasoning, and memory impairment, but can have subtle nuances from diagnosis to diagnosis and are caused by different things. So I don't have time tonight to go into the nuts and bolts of the different types of diagnoses, but the main diagnoses we see are Alzheimer's. It's the most commonly diagnosed form of dementia, which is why I think it's become synonymous with dementia. We see vascular dementia, which is the cumulative damage done to the brain by lots of little mini strokes, or TIAs, transient ischemic attacks. So you have a lot of little strokes, and over time they just kind of peck away and cause some dementia. We see dementia associated with Parkinson's. We see Lewy body dementia. They're getting better at diagnosing that one. Sometimes Lewy body gets misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's or misdiagnosed as Parkinson's because of similar chemical changes. We see dementia caused by stroke. We see dementia caused by Huntington's disease. I could go on and on and on and spend the whole hour listing those. But it's important to know that dementia is not a normal part of the aging process. So often I hear people say to me, well, we were told, well, after all, mom's 93, so what do we expect? And I say, well, Betty White is 94, and she's still acting in a sitcom. So if dementia was a normal part of the aging process, every older adult would have it, right? And we know that's not the case. Dementia is always the result of an illness or an injury to the brain. It includes that cluster of symptoms, and I'll always go back to that. I think the most important thing for us to remember is keeping things in context, and we'll go into why. The impaired intellectual capacity, lack of ability to use logic and reasoning, and memory loss. So important, because often when we're working with someone with dementia, we can put pressure on ourselves or convince ourselves that it's our responsibility to help them remember certain things or help them understand X versus Y. Remember the doctor said you can't drive anymore? Remember you retired. You don't have to go to work anymore. You didn't take your shower yet today. It's 4 o'clock. That's shower time. Remember, the calendar tells us what time we take our bath. Remember. And we think we're being helpful, but we're appealing to logic and reasoning that by definition isn't working if our loved one has a diagnosis of a disease that causes dementia. Does that make sense? So then what? Especially if you're caring for a loved one, you're so used to interacting and communicating using logic and reasoning, How do we get through? How do we connect? Well, people with dementia maintain instinct, intuition, and emotion. And I'll be referring to those three things throughout the rest of the talk as well. That is our foot in the door. So we have to make the shift from communicating intellect to communicating heart to heart or gut to gut. People really are in survival mode at this point. And often it seems like people are more calculating than they really are. If I had a nickel for every time I've heard, well, she's always been manipulative, or he's always been stubborn. Ferreting out the difference when you're caring for someone with whom you have a previous history, the difference between their previous behavior and their current behavior can be really complicated because of those gut level things that stay in place. Lots of those kinds of behaviors are not logical. Emotions are not logical. So before I had dementia, if I felt vulnerable or powerless and I dug my heels in, I could feel more safe and powerful. After dementia, I probably feel vulnerable and powerless all of the time at my gut, even if intellectually I don't have awareness of the depth and the breadth of my problem. So therefore, everyone and everything has to be suspect. I've got to have my guard up, and if you feel like a threat to me and I feel powerless, I'm going to dig my heels in and be stubborn, because that's what makes me feel safe. It's not intellectually calculated behavior so much as it is gut level survivalistic behavior. Does that make sense? But to those of us who grew up with the mother who was really difficult, who's now being really difficult, it's sometimes hard to separate that out. So understanding what it is and what it's not can be really helpful. And I think to the degree that you are able to get a good diagnosis, you will be much more empowered to keep your loved one's behavior in the context of the disease process. So I like to show these pictures. Nobody likes to see them, but I think it's helpful in terms of remembering context, because oftentimes people with dementia who are operating from a place of that gut level emotion or intuition, instinct, can really fly under the radar screen for a long, long time. I had somebody in a class in Santa Rosa tell me, oh yeah, they can hide it really well. And I said, well, I don't think they're hiding it purposefully. It's more of, again, an intuitive ingratiating myself into this situation so I can stay safe. So when you're in the doctor's office and your loved one who you know has a huge discrepancy between their baseline functioning and how they're currently functioning, you know that's why you brought them to the doctor. And the doctor goes through the little mini mental status exam that they do, and your loved one scores 27 out of 30, and the doctor says, well, I think she's doing all right. You know, she might be slowing down. That's normal for aging. And you want to rip your hair out. It's not because mom is calculatingly more difficult at home for you and deciding to remember and compute better in the doctor's office. That's executive functioning that probably isn't available to mom if she really has a dementia. It's more at home, my guard is down, and in the doctor's office, I can sense this is a formal setting, so I put on my formal behavior. If I stayed in the doctor's office for 8 hours, I might not hold it together that long. Or if company comes to visit, you know, brother comes from out of town and says, I think you're making too much of this. I don't think it's that bad. and then brother leaves and it's bad again, and it can feel really intentional. How come she's this way with him and not with me? But it's really more that gut level. Yes, actually, a quick question, but I got to watch the time.
I was going to say, I totally agree with the good diagnosis, but I don't think the GPs feel like they can do it, and I'm wondering who is go to for that good diagnosis. I want that.
It's tricky. It's tricky. You know, lots of times you got to go out of town. So a lot of times you got to go out of town. We recommend really good diagnoses at UCSF Memory and Aging Clinic, UC Davis Alzheimer's Research Center, Stanford VA has a great diagnostic center. And yeah, it's a schlep to get down there. That's something we can consult about if you want to talk to me about some strategies to get a loved one there. I'm going to pass around these handouts, and while I'm passing them around, while they're going around, actually, I'm going to show these slides just so we can keep things in context. So this here is a cross section. Can everybody see this? This is a cross section of a normal, healthy, older adult's brain upon autopsy. And this is a cross section of a person's brain upon autopsy who had Alzheimer's. Literally holes. And I can go into why those holes are there if you want to talk with me afterwards. But even if your loved one doesn't have Alzheimer's, you know, they might not have these holes. But if they have vascular dementia, they might have pockets of dead tissue. There's something else clogging up the works. There might be other proteins. So we can kind of visualize the brain breaking down, and that's precisely what dementia means in Latin. Dementia is the breakdown of the brain. This structure here in the center is the hippocampus. And that's like your brain's save button. It's the relay center in your brain that takes short-term memory and stores it into long-term memory. So, take a look at that section of the brain in the center here. So, to say that dementia is short-term memory loss is not entirely accurate. Short-term memory is about 30 seconds at the longest. It's more accurately the inability to store the short-term memory into long-term memory because the save button doesn't work. So has anybody had the experience of talking to someone with dementia who can tell you every single thing about where they grew up? They know the name of their first grade teacher, but they can't tell you if they had breakfast this morning? So sometimes that can feel manipulative. How come she can remember all this stuff? We get out the high school yearbook, she remembers people I don't even remember. I think she's just trying to have me wait on her. I think she's just trying to get my goat. And then she says she can't remember, she can't drive. Oh yeah, right. She can remember all kinds of stuff. She can remember things that were stored to the hard drive when the save button worked. Does that make sense? But yesterday the save button was broken. So it's like putting your flash drive into the computer and pulling it out without hitting save. Sometimes, yeah. The symptoms vacillate, so that's crazy making too. Yeah, but what we know about dementia is that the only thing that's predictable about it is that it's unpredictable. So everybody has this principles for communication. Okay. I just want to go down together. The first point I've kind of belabored, and I think it needs to be belabored over and over and over, because keeping everything in context is so central to being able to address the behaviors and the communication challenges. We can't interact with someone the way we used to before the dementia and expect it to work the same way. And if you're caring for a loved one, that's tricky because that brings up a lot of grief. It's simultaneously very liberating to cultivate these new strategies and very sad because the new strategies help us not throw fuel on the fire, but they also remind us that the old way doesn't work. So be really gentle with yourselves as you're working towards changing the way you interact. So the first one, understand what is and is not possible to change by learning all you can about the disease. Knowing and accepting the cognitive limitations of the person will help you set realistic expectations. If you're taking notes, I would suggest writing for them and for myself. Oftentimes when I'm seeing someone for counseling, they are more able to give the diagnosed person the benefit of the doubt than they are able to give it to themselves. So if you're getting resentful and frustrated because all of your efforts are not going anywhere, and you've convinced yourself your loved one's not appreciative, it can get to that point. Even though in our heads we know it's the disease, our hearts don't always understand what our heads know. Sometimes that's because we've put an unrealistic expectation on ourselves to help cure the disease. As I said before, if we could help a person with dementia understand something better, if we could help a person with dementia remember, by definition, they don't have dementia anymore. So we've put a huge boulder on our shoulders that we're trying to push up a hill when that's our goal. Again, our goal needs to shift from connection that's intellect to connection that's heart to heart. The next principle here is understand that our thoughts, attitudes, and actions significantly impact the behavior of the person with dementia. That's because they're operating really from this instinctive, intuitive place. And so as the brain is breaking down, they're relying more and more and more on their gut feeling, their gut assessment of the situation, the energy. How does it feel? If it feels safe, it is. If it doesn't feel safe, it's not. So has anybody here ever seen somebody who, I think of my husband, who's never held a baby before, hold a brand new baby in the delivery room who's maybe 2 minutes old? My husband, bless his heart, is a big old 6'4" big guy. And he's a teddy bear. He never held a baby before, our son. He was the youngest child in his family. So the nurse hands him the baby and he's doing this with his big old hand because he doesn't want to hurt the baby. His intent was precious. His intent was what? Yeah, I don't want to hurt the baby. I'm going to hold it really gently. What did the baby do? Cry. Why? That baby wasn't happy and grateful that his father was so gentle and careful with him? Didn't feel secure. Because the baby doesn't care what dad's intention was. Baby's not considering that and computing that. Baby's just instinctive right now. Instinctively, intuitively, the message the baby received was not, I'm so lucky my father's so gentle and careful with me. The message the baby received was, the person responsible for holding my life in the balance is unsure of themselves, therefore danger. Ah! That's a lot of communication. A lot of communication without language or logic or reasoning or a heck of a lot of memory. Baby's only a couple minutes old. So then the nurse holds the baby. She swaddles him so tight I think his eyeballs are going to pop out. And she holds him like this and she burps him like this. And guess who the baby doesn't cry for? The nurse. Why? The person responsible for holding my life in the balance is sure of herself, therefore I'm safe. That's a lot of communication. So we set the tone for the interaction. The class that I pulled this information from is called It Takes Two: Understanding Dementia Behavior. And I remind people, we are responsible for setting the tone, for facilitating the interaction. They're responsible for, their experience. I don't know how responsible they are. They're in charge of their experience. But we have a lot of power to set that tone. Now, don't walk away from here saying I told everyone to bottle their emotions. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying be aware of them. If you're really harried and rushed or frustrated and you've got a million other plates you've got to keep spinning, and you're interacting with someone who has dementia, don't be surprised if they get agitated. If you were late to the doctor's office the last time you had an appointment and you had to reschedule and they didn't have another opening for 3 weeks, and you think you're going to be late this time, and so you're anxious, don't be surprised if they're anxious too. They're taking their cue from you. The next one, recognize that behavior, even in a confused person, more than likely results from a cause. Something triggers the behavior. And if you're taking notes, write down, behavior is always the attempt to fill an unmet need. Always the attempt to fill an unmet need. I have a whole 2-hour class that I teach on this concept. Looking at challenging behaviors and trying to brainstorm what the need behind them might be. What is this behavior seeking to fill? A sense of value, worth, a sense of purpose, a sense of personal power and control, autonomy, a sense of familiarity and predictability. What is this behavior trying to fill? So we're kind of becoming detectives now, and rather than paying attention to the words, we're paying attention to the emotions and the need behind behaviors. The next one here, learn that to enhance communication with a person with dementia requires a commitment to remain connected regardless of the content of the conversation. That's easy to do if the content is lovely, puppy dogs and butterflies. If the content is, you stole my purse, it's harder to remain connected and not get a little defensive, especially if you not only didn't steal their purse, but you quit your job to take care of them, and you don't go to your book club meetings anymore, and your blood pressure's through the roof, and now they're accusing you. It's a little harder to join in that. But if we can remind ourselves that this brain is interpreting the circumstances differently than this brain, and we have a diagnosis for context, and we remember that people are speaking from emotional need, then we can pay less attention to those words and more attention to the need and interpret something like that to mean, right now in this moment, I feel robbed. Right now in this moment, I feel violated. Right now in this moment, I feel threatened, powerless. All of those emotions that come up when our purses get stolen. I feel as if my purse was stolen. You stole my purse. And so then I might interact with someone in a way to help them feel safe in the moment. Oh my goodness, was that your purse? I was just cleaning up. I'll bring it back when I come back. I'm so sorry. You know how I am. Thanks for putting up with me. So that we're speaking to that need to feel seen and heard and understood. People who don't feel seen and heard get bigger and louder. So whenever, and that's true whether we have dementia or not. Whenever somebody's getting bigger and louder, it might be helpful to pause for a moment and consider, how might they not feel seen or heard? Understand that changing behavior takes time, effort, and patience. Reward yourself often for working toward change. Now I'm going to pass out a form here that looks at specific tips and techniques. And I'm going to spend a little time on some of them. I'll prioritize in the interest of time. I'm happy to go into more detail if you have questions. So the first one on the list here, and I know it's still going around, the first one on the list here is reassure, reassure, reassure. Everybody's heard that before. We're supposed to redirect and reassure. I think where it gets difficult sometimes is remembering to reassure to the emotion, not the words. So if you're taking notes when you get your form, if you're taking notes, write to the emotion, not the words. So for example, we had a gentleman who would come to our day program, and it started at 9 and ended at 3, and by 9:05, he'd be squirming out of his chair. I got to go home. I got to go home. I got to get home. I got to get home. And so we thought, okay, well, we're going to reassure him. Oh, it's okay, John. Everybody's going to go home at 3 o'clock, but we're going to have some dogs come and visit, and then we're going to have music, and we're going to have lunch, and it's going to be great, and we'll stay here with you, and then your wife, Doris, is going to pick you up at 3 o'clock. Well, John was demented. He was not stupid. He could look at the clock and know 3 o'clock was a ways off. I can't stay here all day. I got to go home. I got to go home. I got to go home. Well, we're all going to go home at 3 o'clock, John. We thought we were reassuring him, but it was making it worse. What does home represent? Safety. Familiarity. Security. Privacy. A place where I can let my guard down. A place where I belong. A place where people love me. A place where I can be who I am, warts and all. There's not a lot of pressure. Language becomes really symbolic. It becomes metaphoric. Home, purse, wallet, keys, the watch, those are big symbols that tend to come up a lot. Money is another one. So we were reassuring John, but we were speaking to his words. And when we do that, we are entering into the land of logic and reasoning. John got bigger and louder because he didn't feel seen and heard. He was not saying, take me from this building and bring me to that building. He was saying, in this moment right now, I don't feel like anything's familiar. In this moment right now, I don't feel safe. In this moment right now, I don't feel like I have any power. I don't feel like I can let my guard down. I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel at home in my own skin if I have dementia. He didn't have a sense of at-homeness. And we're talking about 3 o'clock and Doris and the bus and this and that. So the next time, we realized that as time went on and we problem solved. So the next time it happened, he was sitting next to me. I got to go home, I got to go home, I got to go home. And I put my hand on his, and we had good rapport. Not everybody wants to be touched, but he and I had good rapport. I put my hand on his, and I said, oh, it's a long day here, isn't it, John? Even though I know he'd only been there for 5 minutes. It is a long day there. I also know people with dementia experience time a little bit differently. And he'd say, oh, you're not kidding, kid. And I'd say, if I have to hear roll out the barrel one more time on that accordion, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he'd chuckle just like you are. And I squeeze his hand and I'd say, thank God we got each other. You're stuck with me today. I'm going to stick with you, you stick with me. We'll get through this together. And he'd say, you got it, kid. Because I helped meet his need in that moment. I gave him a sense of value and purpose because he was going to help me. I gave him a sense of safety and worth because I was going to help him. I let him know he wasn't crazy for thinking this place was not his favorite place to be. Who wants to be in an adult day program for people with dementia? And I worked there over 15 years. I think they're wonderful. But who wants to be there? Who wants to need it? Sometimes there's great power in just speaking about the elephant in the room. My other standby is thank you so much for putting up with me. I know I'm really bossy. Because aren't we? if we're providing care for someone who needs it, we are in all their business. We are really bossy. So reassure to the emotion, not the words, because we know emotions are gut level, they're not logical. Words can be logical. When we start speaking to words, we're speaking to logic. Try to remain calm. Again, I don't mean bottle your emotions. I think this would be better if it said try to convey calm. Pretend like you're calm. Go scream into a pillow, go bang on some drums, go do whatever you need to do to discharge your frustration or your anxiety outside of the person with dementia's presence so that you don't enter into the interaction with that anxious energy like my husband with the baby. So if that means you need to join a caregiver support group, we can talk about that. If that means you want to, talk to friends, whatever it means for you, as long as it's constructive and healthy and you're not hurting someone, I say go for it. And then you'll have more gas in your tank and a little bit more margin so that when you enter into the interaction with the person with dementia, you have the presence of mind to stop and consider the energy you're putting out. If you're just shooting from the hip all the time and you're overwhelmed and exhausted, you're not going to have that presence of mind. Do not disagree with made-up stories. That one can be really tricky. Lots of times people with dementia confabulate, which is not the same thing as lying. Sounds like it. Sometimes it really sounds like it. And a confabulation sometimes has things that really happened mixed in with something they heard on the news last night, mixed in with something they read in the newspaper 12 years ago, all jumbled up into a story. Oh, well, she's always been really dramatic. She likes to be the center of attention. Well, that might be true, but a person whose brain looks like this really isn't capable of coming up with a whopper, remembering it, and telling it to you. That takes a lot of executive functioning. A confabulation is a coping mechanism. When there's blank space, we fill in the space. And it's not manipulative or calculated. It's just a coping strategy. So when we disagree with made-up stories, that's when we start, again, using logic and reasoning. And that doesn't work by definition. But that's when we usually are throwing fuel on the fire. I think of the old Billy Joel song, we didn't start the fire. Fire is always burning, but we don't have to throw gas on it. We don't have control over putting that fire out. The best scientists in the world haven't been able to figure that out. That would take curing the disease. But we do have control over how we interact. We don't have to throw fuel on the fire. And logic and reasoning and disagreeing with someone's story is kerosene. So if somebody tells me that their loved one brought them a bunch of roses yesterday and I know it didn't happen, that's easy to say, oh, how lovely. If somebody tells me that there's somebody in the closet and he's going to hurt her, that's a little trickier. But if I know to speak to the emotion and not the words, then I've got a foot in the door there. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'll make sure somebody checks on that. Why don't you and I go over here where it's safe? I'll stay with you. Does that make sense? Give compliments often. We know that people with early stage dementia who are still a little bit more aware of what's happening have reported lower levels of self-esteem, and it makes sense. In our culture, our ability to contribute, our ability to produce determines our worth. And when we lose those capabilities through disability, often people start to wonder about their value and their worth. As a person's dementia progresses, they might be less cognitively aware of that, but still aware of that void at their gut. And so compliments can be wonderful, especially to set the stage as with that positive energy. People with dementia have implicit memory, which is their emotional memory for a person or a place or a situation. They might not remember the details, but they remember how they felt about it. I used to walk into the day program and they'd say, "Oh, there she is." And if you said, "Who is that?" they wouldn't say, "That's Alexis, the girl who helps us. I was their wife, I was their daughter, I was their sister, I was that nice girl." If the nurse walked into the room, they'd say, "I'm not going with her. She's a bad one." And if you said, "Who is that?" they wouldn't say, "That's Jean, the nurse, who makes us do things we don't want to do, who makes us feel less than." They don't know how they know her or why they know her. They just know she's a bad one. They have an implicit memory. So if we give compliments often, if we set the stage for the person with dementia to save face in our presence while we're doing what needs to be done behind the scenes, then we're setting the stage to be the good cop to them. Does that make sense? It saves a little bit of suffering for them, but it also saves challenge and struggle and heartache for us. We're getting close to the breaking to the time when I know we need to break for questions. So I'm going to just try to hurry through some of these. But some examples of giving compliments often might be somebody comes in with lipstick all over their face. They look like Betty Davis. And you say, "Oh, Marge, you look lovely today." Rather than, "Oh my gosh, let's fix this. You're all smudged." Why did Marge bother to put on lipstick? Because she wanted to look lovely. So, if we say to Marge, "You just look lovely," Marge is going to light up. That was her intent, and that's why she bothered with the lipstick. If somebody's walking around taking everything off the table and putting it in their purse and their pockets, rather than saying, "No, no, 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 those aren't yours, we need to put those back," I might walk up and say, "Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad you were here today. I knew I could count on you." Because their intent was probably to be helpful, behaviors purposeful. So giving compliments sometimes can be challenging. Lots of times people say, "Well, what if they're not doing anything we like?" We speak to their intent. What's the need behind the behavior? We speak to the intent to be purposeful, the intent to be beautiful, the intent to be helpful. Does that make sense? Respond to the person's feelings and not their words. That's because we know that people are really, really tuned into their feelings. Feelings are not logical. Words have to be processed by a broken brain or dictated by a broken brain, so can be unreliable. Does that make sense? But feelings are always true. Joy always feels like joy. Fear always feels like fear. Anger always feels like anger. So if we can connect at that place, we can say, "I see you, I hear you, I'm on your team. I get it." And when people feel seen and heard, they don't have to get bigger and louder. So the next one here is use distractions. If you're taking notes, this one's really helpful. Distractions can be really helpful, but not if we don't connect first. So if you're taking notes, right, first connect, then distract. So we had a person who would come to our day program, and every single day she would forget her purse. And she would, when we were taking our walks, she would start screaming and swearing. She cursed like a sailor. "You're all a bunch of lousy thieves. You stole my purse. You stole my purse. Somebody stole my purse. I'm never coming back to this place." And we thought, "Oh, well, we'll distract her." It was the nurse this time. She ran up to her and she said, "Mary, look at these flowers." And Mary said, "I don't want to look at any GD flowers. Somebody stole my purse." We thought, well, I guess distractions don't work for Mary, huh? Why do you think it didn't work? It didn't connect. Because it's not about the purse. The purse is symbolic. There was no purse. Mary was telling us the feeling welling up inside of me right now is reminiscent of that time when my purse was stolen. So somebody must have stolen my purse. That must be why I feel like someone stole my purse, therefore someone stole my purse. Now you and I have feelings, and we test our feelings against data to kind of come up with our reality. Ooh, I feel like I might be in danger because I heard those bushes rustling. But I just saw a bird come out, so I know that the boogeyman's not in there, right? I have an impulsive feeling, I test it against reality. People with dementia aren't doing that process. I have an emotional hit, that's my truth. So I feel like my purse got stolen right now. How do you feel? Has anybody had their purse or their wallet stolen? You feel violated? You feel fearful? You feel robbed? This disease is robbing Mary of all of those symbolic things that are held in a purse. Her connection to the rest of the world, her power, her orientation. I keep my calendar in there. My clock is on my phone in my purse. When I had my purse stolen, I was more upset about the fact that somebody had my ID. They knew how much I weighed. They knew where I lived. For a while, I would hear rustling outside my window and I think, ooh, is that person who stole my purse stalking me? They know where I live. I felt really vulnerable. I felt really violated. I cared more about that than the money. So Mary's telling us, I'm telling you, I feel violated, and you're telling me, look, it's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman? That's how it feels if you try to distract me before connecting with me. So the next time it happened, she's doing her thing. You're all a bunch of lousy thieves. Somebody stole my purse. Somebody stole my purse. I'm never coming back here again. And I ran up to her and I said, Mary, what's the matter? Somebody stole my purse. I'm never coming back to this place. And I said, oh my gosh, Mary, that's horrible. What did your purse look like? Let me help you look for it. I know there's no purse to be found. But I'm connecting with her. I see you. I hear you. I get it. I'm on your team. She's already not screaming. Let's walk around and look. She's quieting down. We take a few steps. And then we walk by the roses. And then as she's calm, I say, oh, Mary, look at these roses. Smell this one. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Do you have a garden? And now we're distracted and talking about gardens. That doesn't mean she didn't think somebody stole her purse 5 more times that day. My goal is never to stop problematic behavior from starting. I think that's an unrealistic expectation to put on myself because behavior is a symptom. She could have asked 10 more times that day. She could have thought someone stole her purse 10 more times that day. My goal is simply not to add fuel to the flames when they're there. Not to stop problematic behavior from starting, simply to not contribute to it getting worse. Does that make sense? So even if it happened more times that day, day in and day out, I can still feel successful if I'm not making it worse when it happens. Don't try to reason with the person. Why? They don't have logic and reasoning, by definition. Give yourself permission to alter the truth. This one's a tricky one because we're taught when we're this big that truth at all costs is respectful and altering the truth is disrespectful. And we want to be respectful, kind people. But the truth for this brain is different than the truth for this brain. And so as long as I'm joining in their reality, I can ethically give myself permission to alter the truth. And maybe I've been doing this so long that I rationalize it, but I really think I'm more honest when I'm speaking to their emotions than their words. For example, have you seen my mother? I can't find my mother. And I know their mother's been dead for 25 years. Rather than saying, well, remember the heart attack? I can say, you know, I haven't seen her lately, but as soon as I do, you'll be the first to know. And I think that's the truth. I'm comfortable, my conscience is clear making that promise, because if I do see her dead mother, I will move heaven and earth to make sure she's the first to know. Avoid asking questions that rely on short-term memory. This is because we know that hippocampus is broken, right? So the short-term memory didn't get stored. So we can really set the stage for a more successful connection if we ask those reminiscence questions and connect people with memories that evoke comforting emotions. That can be really powerful. Break down all tasks into simple steps. One time we did a workshop and we listed how many steps there were involved in brushing your teeth, and I think we got to about 35 before we stopped. We could have kept going. We take for granted how much mental mapping and mental planning we do in mundane tasks. The last one here, respond calmly to anger, don't contradict. We shouldn't be contradicting anyway, because that's when we're entering into logic and reasoning land. But especially when someone's angry, that's when things can get dangerous. We can throw lots of fuel on a dangerous fire. When I'm angry and someone tries to contradict me, it doesn't end well. Doesn't convince me not to be angry. Physiologically, the human body takes 15 to 20 minutes to come back down to baseline after having been angry. So if somebody's angry, chances are you're also getting angry. Give it 15 to 20 minutes to calm down. And then when you re-enter the situation, don't pick up where you left off. Pick up on a lovely topic like, would you like a bowl of ice cream? Something to set that tone of safety and security and comfort. You have a lot of power to connect at a heart-to-heart level if you can remember that the intellect-to-intellect level isn't going to work anymore. So we've gone over a little bit. I know you guys might have some questions. I'm happy to take questions, and I'll just take questions till I get the hook. Is that fair? Okay.
I have a dear friend who I do not live with who is demonstrating behavior of forgetting. She's gotten hooked up with a scam artist who's emptied her bank account. I think she's given account numbers for the credit cards. The credit cards are now maxed out, and she refuses to admit any of that, and she's now wanting to borrow money and wanting me and other friends to pay her bills, and she lives alone, and we don't know what to do.
Yeah. Is Adult Protective Services involved? No. Okay. I would probably get them involved. It sounds like she's at risk right now. So for whatever reason, we don't have a diagnosis, but for whatever reason, she's not using good judgment and she's at risk. If those scam artists showed up at her door, might she let them in? Yeah, so I would say they could be a good resource in terms of helping with problem solving. I don't know that she's ever going to admit that she's doing it, because if she does have a neurocognitive impairment, she's not in denial, she has lack of awareness for the problem. So that's kind of a catch-22. Does she have family?
No one near her brother is mentally retarded, so it's just us friends.
Okay.
Around.
Did she do any legal planning? Is anybody a power of attorney for? Okay. Yeah, I would say, and I'm happy to consult afterwards. If you want to take my card, we can call, and you can call me and we can talk a little bit more. But I would say probably getting Adult Protective Services in to see what kind of networking they might be able to suggest to put a web around this person. It sounds like it could potentially be really, really dangerous. Yeah. So having a good long-term care plan in place, looking at what your options might be, is a really, really important thing to consider. That's something we can help with too. If you call into our office at our initial assessment, we kind of look at what do you have in place. One of the questions we ask everybody is, what factors might play into a decision for you to move your loved one into a long-term care facility? Now, we assume everybody wants to age in place, stay in their own home. We assume that's the desire of most people's hearts, and that most families want to help keep their loved one at home. But sometimes you're caring for someone who wasn't really nice, who wasn't nice to you, and now you're having to provide all of this care for them, dealing with all the other things that everyone else is dealing with, plus the caregiving challenges, and it can be too much. So having a good long-term care plan in place, knowing what your options are, and feeling like you have a plan B can be really helpful. In the state of California, the only thing that Medi-Cal will pay for is skilled nursing care. Yeah, so you're not left with good solutions. You have hard versus harder. And so sometimes keeping someone at home, building skills, is worthwhile. And if you can get enough support for yourself, you can do that a little bit longer. If the bottom falls out and you're looking at needing long-term care placement, usually that's because home's already not safe, or home's already gotten to the point where, things are not ideal. So the unfortunate truth about our state is, for lots of people, the only other alternative is a nursing facility. Yeah, sadly, huh? Sometimes you have to pull back and say, we're so sorry. Thank you for putting up with us. We know we've been really bossy. Thank you so much. But again, just like Mary with the purse, the expectation that she's going to stop feeling this way or saying these things is probably unrealistic. So that she's saying those things doesn't necessarily mean you haven't come up with the silver bullet. There might not be a silver bullet. When she says it, when she's got her guard up, then you just go back to that broken record. Thank you so much for putting up with us. You must be so frustrated to have everybody in your business. You can be her ally and wink at her husband and say, come on, come with me. Let's get out of here, just us girls, for a minute, so that she feels safe in your presence, and that's connecting, and then maybe distract onto something else till she brings it up again. The truth is, she's going to bring it up every time she has the feeling, and she's going to have that feeling a lot because everybody is in her business a lot. Everybody is telling her there's something the matter with her that she doesn't believe is true. Everybody is lying to her about her, to everyone else about her. So she's got her guard up. So it doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means you accommodate her normal response to those uncomfortable things that are happening out of necessity. She doesn't understand the necessity. I don't have easy for anybody. I have hard versus harder. There's a lot of grief that comes up. We don't want to be in the role of the person creating the discomfort any more than they want us in that role. It's really tricky. Here and then here.
Is it advantageous to have a diagnosis of what is causing the dementia, or is it just deal with the symptoms?
My bias is that knowledge is power. So if I know that my loved one has Lewy body dementia and they've got a motor disturbance and intense visual hallucinations and they could go into neuroleptic shock if we gave them certain antipsychotic medications, that's helpful. So that if they go to the emergency room, I can advocate, don't give her that Ativan, don't give her this. I'm also going to know, of course she sees a child right there in front of her because visual hallucinations that are intense are a marker. That doesn't mean that everyone who hallucinates has Lewy body, but it goes along and is consistent. I think the value of a good diagnosis is so that the family caregivers have that context we talked about in the beginning. or the staff. Yeah. Understand what we're working with. We can better advocate for the person with dementia, but we can also set better expectations for ourselves. Oh, of course she's saying everything that pops into her mind and obsessive about every single water bottle that she sees as we drive down the freeway, to the point where she wants to open the car door and jump out and get them, because she has frontotemporal dementia. And our frontal lobes keep our inhibitions and our impulses in check. She doesn't have any impulse control. So behavioral changes are a marker there. So I think in terms of the person with dementia's experience, unless we're identifying something that can be treated that mimicked the dementia, or we're preventing contraindicated treatments like antipsychotic medications for someone with Lewy body dementia, their experience is going to be what it's going to be regardless of the diagnosis. But the value, the great value, I think, is for the people providing care to set realistic expectations for them and for themselves. And that does indirectly translate into a benefit for the care receiver, because the person who's sure of themselves helps them feel safe in the context and is comfortable allowing them to have their dementia however they're going to have it. Does that make sense? You here.
Do you know, are you aware of what resources are available up by Wairika? We have a brother-in-law, who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Yeah. And his wife feels very alone. There's no family around.
So we have a sister agency called Mountain Caregiver Resource Center. And you can Google them, or you can call our office and we can give you their contact information. Mountain Caregiver Resource Center. They do what we do there. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know that their office is in Wairika, but they cover that area. Mm-hmm. Yes?
People with seizure disorders tend to get dementia.
Seizure disorders can cause some cognitive impairment over time. If they're having lots of little seizures, they're getting little acquired brain injuries. So not everyone who has a seizure has dementia. Don't hear me say that. But sometimes we see a little bit of fogginess. Yeah. Can I do one very quick one? Okay. Yes, Marcia.
I just wanted to let people know that if you're a caregiver, there is a free support group, and it was like a lifeline for me. It was wonderful. It is wonderful. Second and fourth Monday. And it's in Ukiah, and perhaps after the meeting you can get all the information. And it is free. It is not going to stress your budget.
And we have it on one of the fact sheets up here. I have a list of the classes that we offer. We offer classes monthly on the third Wednesday at the Ukiah Senior Center. And then on the flip side of that, the list of classes is the Ukiah support group schedule. Thank you all so much. It's been my pleasure for being here.